Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, supporters, readers, leaders, and friends. Friends who believe in the power of stories and the essential role that libraries play in shaping our cultural memory. My name is Amanda Doyle-Bouvier, and tonight I'm celebrating just over 1 month as the Executive Director of the Associates of the Boston Public Library. What a thrill to be able to celebrate here with all of you. As many of you know, the Associates of the Boston Public Library has a singular mission: to preserve and protect the extraordinary treasures within the BPL world-renowned special collections. These collections are among the most remarkable in the nation. They include rare books and manuscripts, stunning works of art, original and historically significant musical scores, and countless artifacts that illuminate our shared past. Stories, ideas, and history do not survive by accident. They survive because people care. They care enough to protect them. When we protect archives and historical documents, whether physical or digital, we guard against cultural amnesia. We prevent loss, distortion, and erasure. We ensure that future generations inherit a full, truthful, and diverse record of our history. That is why the Associates exist. Through the generosity of our members and donors, we fund critical conservation projects and support 10 full-time staff positions devoted entirely to the stewardship of these irreplaceable materials. These are the conservators, catalogers, digitization specialists, and curators whose highly specialized skills made it possible for the BPL to care for millions of items. Their work is meticulous, it is essential, and it's often invisible. Our investment has grown over time, and today the Associates provides more than $1.2 million a year to the Boston Public Library to advance this vital work. But our mission extends beyond preservation alone. We bring the BPL's special collections into contemporary conversation through programs that make literature, history, and culture accessible and engaging for all, which is why we're all here tonight. Since 1999, we've hosted the 100-Year Book Debate, celebrating the enduring power of literature and inviting our community to rethink classics that we may believe we already know. We have first edition copies in the special collections of each of the 3 books that are being debated tonight, 2 of which are autographed, and all are available for the public to view. We also support creativity and the literary arts through our Alan Andres Writer-in-Residence Fellowships. We celebrate outstanding authors each spring at our Literary Lights Gala, and on June 25th, we'll present our Pierce Performance Series, a dynamic program blending performing arts and storytelling to explore pivotal cultural moments. This year, aligning with the library to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. These events remind us that libraries are not quiet repositories of the past. They are living institutions that spark dialogue, curiosity, and connection. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to thank everyone who makes this event possible, starting with the 100-Year Book Debate Planning Committee Chair, Lisa Fagan-Davis. And the full committee, if you could all stand, our 100-Year Book Debate Committee, if you could stand to be acknowledged. I'd also like to recognize the Associate Chair, Alice Lee, and our Vice Chair, Usha Pasi. We have many other members of our board here tonight, and I'd like to thank you all for your dedication to the special collections, for sharing your love of books and your love of libraries. Thank you as well to the library and to President David Leonard and Beth Prindle, Director of Research and Special Collections. I'd like to thank them for their continued partnership, and to the library staff who collaborate with us so generously, and to the small but mighty associates of the Boston Public Library team. I see you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to thank our bookstore partners. They've been promoting this event for us and have been incredible partners in continuing to discover ways for us to bring our message to a larger audience. I'd like to thank Trident Booksellers, who will be selling books outside in the lobby. If you've not already had a chance to check them out, they'll be here after as well. And really just thank you all for being here. Now, it's my honor to introduce Kennedy Elsey, our incredible moderator for the evening. Kennedy is the co-host of the popular morning radio program, Carson and Kennedy on Mix 104.1, where they make us laugh and cry all in one morning. Not me. She is also a dedicated community advocate supporting Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, Special Olympics Massachusetts, and Samaritans through her work with Hey Sam, raising more than $50,000 through her wicked $100,000 through her wicked long walk. Amazing. The Boston Public Library is a special place for Kennedy, and we're honored to welcome her back for her 5th year as moderator of tonight's debates. Yay, me. All right, take it away, Kennedy.
Thank you, Laura. Good job. Have fun. I will.
Hi, kids. I'm so happy to be back. How are ya? Seriously, we are full tonight. I'm proud of you. Thank you for being here. So, we're going to go back to 1926, and I'm going to sit here and tell you some things that happened importantly in the world and make some jokes. You with me? Yeah. And that means you can laugh. It's really the first year I did this, people were like, and I was like, no, you can totally laugh. Alrighty, so things that happened in 1926. On January 26th, the Scottish inventor by the name of John Logie Baird successfully transmitted the first television image, signaling the future of mass media, and for him, we thank for reality television. That same year saw major advances in communication and science, including the first transatlantic phone call between New York and London. And we still can't make a call in the Ted Williams Tunnel, but it's all good. The launch of the first liquid-fueled rocket by Robert H. Goddard in Auburn, Massachusetts, a massive scientific leap that happened quietly in central Massachusetts, which feels pretty much on brand. And 1926 was also the birth year of influential figures such as Queen Elizabeth II, Fidel Castro, Miles Davis, Marilyn Monroe, and Allen Ginsberg. And we celebrated our sesquicentennial, celebrating 150 years since the American Revolution. Some other stuff that happened, Harry Houdini died, but in that same year, he stayed in a coffin underwater for an hour and a half because therapy hadn't been invented yet, and he was just doing his best. Ford Motor Company, led by Henry Ford, becomes one of the first companies to implement the 40-hour work week. Designed before email, Slack, and the phrase, just circling back. The first SAT is administered to 8,000 high school students, making 17-year-olds cry forever. The weather map was televised for the first time from the NAA radio facility in Arlington, Virginia, to the Weather Bureau in D.C. This invention would later be responsible for Bread, Milk, and Panic. Warner Brothers debuts the first Vitaphone film Don Juan, which is using gramophone records, so it's the first time you had sound and music synchronized in a film, which is kind of cool. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the record player, declares radio a commercial failure. I beg to differ. NBC, which was then radio only, launched 24 stations across the United States. Again, thanks for giving me a job. The Red Sox. Every year I come here and we talk about the Red Sox, and every time I say the same thing, that they didn't win, but this year was especially devastating. There was a severe windstorm in July that destroyed 600 seats, and then a fire broke out at Fenway as well, causing more damage to the stadium, and they finished dead last. So again, very on brand. And in 1926, the fare for a single ride on the T was 10 cents, or $1.30 in today's currency. The company struggled to make needed improvements in service, and so they got out a pamphlet called Use the Elevated, because they wanted people to use it. Because they said, I swear to God, it's going to be good. Different price, same energy. And that is 1926. Thank you, friends. So now we are going to begin our debate of these three incredible books. And as was said to you before, the voting will happen after you hear what you hear. And I just would like to encourage you guys. I know that you might have a favorite book here. I know Winnie-the-Pooh speaks to us. I know you might have a favorite human being here who's debating. But at the end of the day, this is about their debate and how they challenged this book and made you rethink the way you think about it. So before you vote, please make sure you're taking a moment to make sure that's why you're voting. Yeah? All right. First up, Hilary Justice is the Patrick and Carol T. Hemingway Scholar in Residence at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, where she is curator of Hemingway at the JFK, the definitive online resource for Hemingway's life, times, works, and legacy. An award-winning scholar and educator, she has published extensively on Mr. Hemingway. She recently served as music consultant on Ken Burns' Hemingway documentary. No big deal. Not a flex at all. She has served on the boards of the International Hemingway Society and the Ernest Hemingway Foundation of Oak Park, and currently serves on the editorial board of the Hemingway Review. Please welcome Hilary K. Justice. Go get them.
Thank you, Kennedy. And thank you, everyone, for being here on a snowy evening. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk about Ernest Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises with you. Ernest Hemingway is one of those names that people have an almost instantaneous, visceral reaction to. And I got the lucky job of representing Ernest Hemingway tonight. So, one of the things I want to do is I want to take you back to who Ernest Hemingway was in 1926. He's not the Ernest Hemingway with the beard and the turtleneck and the reputation and the many marriages and the alcoholism and the suicide. He's not that. He is a young man. He's working as a journalist. He's happily married. Yes, for one brief shining moment, he was happily married. He has discovered that he has a rare talent for writing prose fiction. He's published a book of short stories. He's attracted the attention of everyone who was anyone in expatriate Paris, which is no big deal. It's just like, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein, people like that. They thought there was something there. However, he was also under tremendous pressure, because when you are a writer of prose fiction in America, you are no one unless you write a novel. And so Ernest Hemingway, very bravely, I was speaking with a colleague just now, and he said, this is his action hero origin story. He felt huge pressure to write a novel and huge uncertainty about how to go about doing it. And so he followed some maxims that, they're advice that people give to writers today. Write what you know. Stick close to your voice. And he was trained as a journalist, and so when you read The Sun Also Rises, you're reading something that feels very much like journalism. And in fact, the main character, Jake Barnes, the narrator, is also a journalist. You see how he was hedging his bets here. And so he wrote this novel, and he sent the draft to F. Scott Fitzgerald, who said, well, cut the first 16 pages because they're crap. And so Hemingway wrote something that we now call a novel, but it was a lot more than that. He was writing a roman à clef, which is if you were in the inside circle of literati in the Paris expatriate community, you would recognize real people in those characters. It's the only time he ever did it. He used it as a little bit of a crutch. And for the only time in his life, he was writing about something that had just happened to him. Later on in his fiction, he would let time pass before he would write about it. But in this one moment, he was like, all right, I'm going to write about everything that happened to me and my friends. I'm going to fictionalize it. But it was basically the previous summer in Pamplona. This is dangerous. And Ernest Hemingway never shied away from danger. In fact, he sort of ran self-destructively toward it. Sort of a character flaw of his. But as you're reading The Sun Also Rises, you may find yourself legitimately thinking, these people feel like stereotypes. They feel shallow. They feel a little brittle. And they're all of the above, distanced even further by the fact that Hemingway was writing as a journalist. He was constantly observing his friends. It cannot have been easy to be a friend of Ernest Hemingway's, because every time he published a new book, you're like, uh-oh, here it comes. And also his narrator is a journalist who's also observing these people. And so they feel a little bit flat. They don't feel like real human beings. They don't have the complexity of real human beings. So far, what I have described to you sounds like you could legitimately call it, nice try, Ernest, but, you know, maybe go back to the drawing board. But on the advice of F. Scott Fitzgerald, Scribner's publishing company had picked up Hemingway as a writer. He was this crazy young, rogue, untested talent, and he sent them The Sun Also Rises minus the first 16 pages. And they published it. And it sold like hotcakes. Scribner's had to put out a second printing a couple of weeks after they published the novel. And then they had to put out a third printing a couple of weeks after that. And then every month for the next 6 months, they had to do another printing. The Sun Also Rises landed in Anglophone letters in 1926 like Harry Potter. Now, okay, Dr. Justice, you've given us a description of a book that sounds kind of questionable, and yet it was incredibly powerful and popular. What's going on there? What's going on there is it's many things. It is a novel by and for veterans. When Brett introduces Count Mippopoulos to Jake, she says, he's one of us. What she means by that is someone whose world has been upended. He bears the scars and wounds of several wars. Most of the characters in The Sun Also Rises are veterans of World War I. But Dr. J, World War I was over in 1918, 1919. You know, it's 1926. How is this possible? Well, it's possible because that amount of time that passed between Armistice Day and the publication of The Sun Also Rises is the same amount of time that passed between the end of the Vietnam War and Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, which is the story of a young no one. They put a rifle in his hand, they send him to war, and he comes back to discover that there is no place for him in his country. There is no respect for his service. His world is broken and shattered, and he's angry about it. So rereading The Sun Also Rises in preparation for this, I have to say, the first time I read it, I had to read it for class, and I hated it. Because I didn't understand it. I think I was asked to read it too young. And second of all, nobody frickin' told me it was a story about veterans. All of the people in that novel, they are distanced from you by Hemingway's journalistic observation of real people having clever, distancing conversations. Every character in that novel who was affected by World War I, and most of them were, a couple of them were, they're broken. They are broken people in a broken world that somehow have to get up. Jake goes to work. Somebody's got to pay the bills. They have to continue to function, and they don't know how. And as Kennedy pointed out, therapy hadn't been invented yet. So, a little bit about that lost generation that Hemingway was writing from and about, and as Scribner's discovered, too. The book hit a nerve. It fed a need. And what was that need, and how did it happen? The epigraph to the book from Gertrude Stein says, "You are all a lost generation." That's literal. Some statistics from World War I for just American and United Kingdom deaths. Combat deaths for British soldiers, 744,000. Military deaths from all causes, including the dysentery that took Brett Ashley's first and probably only real love, closer to 900,000. The military wounded numbered 1,675,000. If you expand that to the British Empire, 1 million soldiers were lost, and there were more than 2 million wounded. For the United States, that got into the war very, very late in the game, there were 53,000 combat deaths, 116,000 military deaths. This was the flu pandemic that was responsible for a lot of them, and over 200,000 wounded. The survivors were all traumatized before they had that word to explain to themselves, to each other, to their families, to their country, what was wrong. Nothing in their childhoods, and remember, they were raised by parents who were raised at the end of the Victorian era. They were raised where the most progressive figure on the world stage was Teddy frickin' Roosevelt. Nothing had prepared them for the technology of modern warfare, for the trenches, for threats coming from the sky. At the very level of, biological reality, human beings are not threatened by any animal that flies. This is a complete upending of everything down to your very bones. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Initially, the Allies were outclassed. German firepower was so superior that at the Battle of the Somme, the German troops just stopped firing because they were so appalled at the level of the slaughter that they were inflicting. To lighten it up a little bit, if you've seen Downton Abbey, you know that the entire British aristocracy and British Empire is slowly going the way of the dodo. Everyone was literally and figuratively lost. The author, Ernest Hemingway, the narrator, Jake Barnes, almost all the rest of the characters, from Brett to Bill to Mike to Harris, even to Count Miphopopoulos, whom Brett introduces as one of us, they all bear the scars of war, but only the Count can bear them with any acceptance or dignity. Without exception, these characters are unlikable. I love reading fiction. I don't love spending time with the characters in The Sun Also Rises. They're brittle, they're cruel, they're mean, they're clever, and they banter. But they're addicted to alcohol, they're addicted to gambling, they're addicted to sex. Do you see what's going on here through the veteran's lens? They're trying to anesthetize something they don't have a name for. They're trying to protect themselves when they don't know what's wrong. It's almost as if they're too scared, or they lack the language, or they lack the cultural framework, or they lack the insights of today's American Psychological Association that would let them to admit to each other that they are terrified. Their every interaction increases the distance between them. It's only possible to sleep with the light on. Sometimes one of them goes off like a cat doesn't eat for days. And they all criticize each other. Oh my gosh, they are so mean. Everything they do, they're terrified. Unhealthy coping mechanisms abound. They're like wounded animals. Their cruelty is designed to humiliate, to mirror their own isolation and alienation from each other, from their worlds, from the things that they want to value and can't. Except for Robert Cohn. He's not a veteran. And he is the only one in the novel who believes that love is still an ideal. Everyone in that novel is so jealous of him for being able to hold that ideal, that value, that they bully him unmercilessly. It is awful. It is awful to read. But you know something? Human beings are sometimes awful to each other. It's a hard book to read. But it's a book about survivors of trauma who don't have the language for trauma. So now the American Psychological Association has a list of behaviors that you are supposed to avoid if you are trying to heal from trauma. These characters use that avoid this behavior as a checklist for exactly what to do. The APA also has a list of behaviors to embrace. And with the exception of the scene where Jake goes swimming, which I think is beautiful, and I think that indicates the Hemingway who would later write about World War I directly in A Farewell to Arms just a few years later. That's where his talent is. Because that's almost a sacred experience after the craziness of the fiesta, and Brett has slept with everybody, and they have been so mean to Cohn throughout. Jake just goes swimming at San Sebastian, and it almost feels holy. It's the only moment of peace you get in the entire thing. Hemingway could do that. He didn't know how well he could do that yet. He's just a kid who can land a quad axle and write some short stories right now. You know, he hasn't quite figured out how to put together his long program. The characters in The Sun Also Rises are not 21st century people. They're the products of upbringings grounded in the 19th century and Roosevelt-era progressivism who've been alienated from themselves, and the world is unrecognizable to them after World War I. They do everything they're not supposed to do, and very, very little of what would be healing. The crucial part of healing trauma is connection, and every single line in the novel rejects the possibility of connection, unless you watch poor Robert Cohn following Brett around because he still believes in some holy ideal of love. The lack of possible connection in this novel is literal. The injury that Jake Barnes had was a very common injury. Threats aren't supposed to come from the sky, but the people who put the threats into the sky didn't think that perhaps they should design airplanes made out of something other than wood, so that when people are shooting at you from the ground and their bullet goes up, they shoot right through the pilot's seat. Jake Barnes has no penis. He literally cannot connect with Brett. There is no way. He can feel desire. This injury was so common that very quickly they changed airplane design and made the seats out of cast iron. There was a popular song about it calling it the pilot's friend. Jake has to treat it like a joke, and it's heartbreaking. And all of these characters are essentially heartbreaking, but it struck a nerve with those buyers in New York. Everybody who picked up that book, this explains it. It gave connection to those readers when they didn't know they needed it either. It didn't do it overtly. Hemingway would never tell you what to think, never tell you what to feel. But it hit a nerve in the population of 1926, the same way that Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA hit a nerve in 1984. There's just enough time between the end of the war and the publication of that novel or that hit song for the world to forget to remember. And that marks the beginning of an eternity for the veterans whose bodies and souls won't let them forget. Thank you.
Unhealthy Coping Mechanisms, my new band name. Thank you. Please, once again, for Dr. Hilary Justice. And now I would like to introduce to you literary performer Regie Gibson. He received both the Absolute Poetry Award and the Europa in Versi Award in LaGuardia di Como. He's a Brother Thomas Fellow and received 2 Live Arts Boston grants to develop the Juke, a blues Boston Bache, which intersects the ancient Greek tragedy with African-American spiritual and musical culture. And when I met him, I'm like, please tell me how you made Eurydice do that. I can't wait to talk to you about this because it's fascinating to me. So I'm super excited about this. And he teaches at Berklee College of Music and Clark University and is the inaugural Poet Laureate of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you please, a big welcome for Regie Gibson.
Good evening, all of my fellow word nerds. Good to be here, and at some point I'll be accompanied by Mr. Blake Newman on bass. In 1891, Jeanette Meyer Thurber, founder of the National Conservatory of Music in New York City, concluded that they would need to bring in a recognized master of the European classical and concert traditions to teach American composers the correct way to music, and by proxy bestow upon the country some compositional and much-needed cultural street cred. So, Thurber, through both plucky persistence and a sizable offering of obscene financial inducement, managed to secure Czech master composer Antonín Dvořák to accept the directorship of the conservatory. His mission, to create a national American musical spirit. Dvořák didn't come to America to give a prescriptive diktat of how its music should be. He was interested in traveling through and listening to America to get a sense of our soul song of this country. Given he spoke passable English, it is quite possible he became familiar with Whitman's I Hear America Singing. After meeting and working with Henry Burley, an African-American expert of the spirituals, Dvořák became convinced that along with the indigenous influences, America's national musical spirit was to be found in the music of African Americans. As you can imagine, when Dvořák presented his findings to the conservatory board, many an incredulous was followed by an uncomfortable And there fell upon the board a great gnashing of teeth, and many a pearl died in the clutching. The very idea that such simple, unadorned music coming from an untutored and reviled population could offer any insight into the soul of this country had to be a pile of misguided piffle bordering on bovine fecality. Dvořák refused to recant. He had, after all, recognized the foundations of the true soul song of his beloved Bohemia were firmly rooted in the underclass and not the aristocracy. In his four-movement New World Symphony, Dvořák incorporates indigenous and African-American musical elements and used them to compose one of the most important classical compositions ever created on American soil. I found this bit of history very helpful in my rethinking and better understanding the poems of Langston Hughes' The Weary Blues, his debut volume. Hughes' work is vitally important for those who truly wish to understand America and not the knockoff version we seem to be getting sold. The Weary Blues is heavy with needed to be heard history and gives spoken and sung voice, dignity, and visibility to a discarded and disregarded population historically considered a non-constituency. Langston Hughes, as many of us here know, was a leading figure in one of the most fruitful periods of American literature, the Harlem Renaissance. He was a tireless writer who wrote in all genres, fiction, poetry, song, libretto, journalism. He was fluent in both Spanish and French and translated works from both into English. Hughes, an obsessive reader, was well versed in the intellectual language of modernism and could, had he so chosen, utilize the often clinical and often furtive allusion-ridden language of the contemporary literati, as well as the genteel rhetorical pastels of parlor room poetry. But Hughes was also an obsessive listener, just like Dvorak. He'd sit on the stoop of his brownstone in Harlem or stand on the street corners of Lenox Ave, close his eyes, and listen to the conversations and vocal cadences of people as they passed by. Hughes did this because, as most of the poems in the Weary Blues will attest, he was driven to employ the dark earth hues and night-veiled tones coloring the speech of the black immigrant come north. And with these tones and hues, he painted portraits of Harlem that are as celebratory as they are sometimes sad, as peppered with partying as they often are with poignance. Listen to the titular poem of the collection, The Weary Blues. Droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play down on Lenox Ave the other night. By the pale, dull pallor of an old gaslight, he did a lazy sway. He did a lazy sway to the tune of the Weary Blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues. Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues. In a deep song, with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I'm gonna quit my frowning and put my troubles on the shelf. When his foot on the floor, he played a few chords and he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues and can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no more and I wish I died. And far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead. Now, immediately, we notice the poem's use of musical elements, rhyme, and other correspondences of sound like consonants, assonance, alliteration, and onomatopoeia. We also notice the use of personification, the piano moans, and of course, the down-home accented vocalizations of the poem's subject. Hughes concludes it with the player going home to lay down his head while the weary blues echo through his head, and that he slept like a man, a rock or a man that's dead. Now, ignoring that there is no way Hughes could have accessed to any of these facts, the cat's head, what's going on in it, or his quality of slumber, this last section is clearly imagined, and given that this dual simile of a last line has always puzzled me, as I would have expected Hughes to have ended the poem by repeating, while the weary blues echoed through his head, while the weary blues echoed through his head. This seems natural given the word echoed naturally signals a repetition of the last uttered phrase, and I guess given my respect for Robert Frost, I would have liked some form of "and miles to go before I sleep" and "miles to go before I sleep" in that moment, but he gave that not. But now, what I've come to believe is that Hughes may have needed to convey through the image of a rock and a man that's dead our beyond cares of this world, and neither experience the emotional, physical, and existential weariness of performing and living through a world of suffering, racial violence, or violence and suffering otherwise. Even though Hughes's Weary Blues offers us a complex portrait of Harlem of his time, the feelings and sentiments and experiences of the poem are not the privy of Harlem alone, or even of those consigned to the black urban ghettos. They could have as easily been expressed by white itinerant workers in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl years, known as the Dirty 30s, Appalachian coal miners in West Virginia, or any group shot through with both the social sorrow of living in a dark, nightmarish existence illuminated by American hypocrisy and the need for tragic comic laughter and musical salvation that helps in surviving in the shanty town outside the apartheid of the American dream. In the Weary Blues, we find some of the earliest musical explorations and innovations in American letters. In it, Hughes distills the slow, swing, and driving syncopated rhythms of the blues and jazz into poetry, what he called the human soul entire, squeezed like a lemon or lime, drop by drop into atomic words. An arresting image. In addition to Hughes's immersing himself in the natural poetry of black idiomatic speech permeating Harlem at all times, the Weary Blues, Hughes creates neologisms in the form of kennings, the bringing together of two or more words to create unique and potent descriptions. Check these out. Jazz tuned, night gone, lover lass, sleet stung, jazz boys, beast strong, cloud cloth, gay colored, time dead, moon glimmer. Hughes uses this adjectival compound constructions, which were inherited from the ancient Danish and Norwegian poetic traditions, to power the imagistic image of his poems, punctuating them with surprise and quickening musical and narrative effect. Langston Hughes is arguably one of the most important and influential literary figures our country has ever produced, and has had an influence on succeeding generations of poets that, in my estimation, outstrip those of Pound and Eliot and other high modernists who panned him. And now I have a couple of confessions to make. For most of my reading life, Langston Hughes has never been one of my favorite poets. I have often remarked, with tongue only slightly lightly grazing cheek, that though I love his Just Be Simple stories, his many articles of criticism, and his memoirs, if Hughes were a poetry student in my undergraduate class, I would run out of red ink marking up his poems. However, after a prolonged engagement with the Weary Blues, I realized something. I never actually engaged with the Weary Blues. Yes, of course, I have read the poems in several volumes of Hughes' selected poetry. I've performed and presented papers on several of them, and even created a performance with a big band called 3 or 4 Hues of Hughes. But I had never before read the book, The Weary Blues, never experienced the poems the way Hughes originally intended for them to be experienced, the way he laid them out, musical piece into musical piece into narrative musical piece. And I'm glad I did. When engaged with, in total, The Weary Blues is a musical literary composition arranged in 8 suites, each with distinct and multiple moods and movements. In Suite 1, the titular suite, The Weary Blues, we are swept along in a reverie of music and dance, and are graced and chased by vivid depictions of Harlem's nightlife. In Suite 2, Dream Variations, we are visited by haunting desires, unfulfilled longings, and a palpable sense of alienation. In The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Suite 3, we wrestle the beauties and bewailings of black history, heritage, race, the results of miscegenation, and ultimately end in perseverance and healing. In Suite 4, A Black Perrault being a clown-like figure in the Commedia dell'arte tradition, we confront the expressions of unconsummated lust and the frustrations of unrequited love. In Suite 5, Waterfront Streets, Hughes sends us sparse snapshots, vivid and colorful postcards of his time as a sailor, like this one entitled Caribbean Sunset. God having a hemorrhage, blood coughed across the sky, staining the dark sea red. This is sunset in the Caribbean. In Shadows in the Sun, Suite 6, we get a poignant work that touches upon some of Hughes's responses to poverty and hopelessness he witnessed as a sailor. Here are 2 very short poems. One is called Suicide Note. It's almost haiku-like. the calm, cool face of the river, asked me for a kiss. And then the second, Beggar Boy, which was written, I believe, in Mexico. And he says, what is there within this beggar lad that I can neither hear nor feel nor see, that I can neither know nor understand, and still it calls to me? Is not he but a shadow in the sun, a bit of clay, brown, ugly, given life? And yet he plays upon the flute a wild, free tune, as if fate had not bled him with her knife. Suite 7, the Weary Blues' last full suite of poems is called Our Land, in which Hughes returns to heritage, heartbreak, and how to use both to keep reaching higher. The volume includes an epilogue, I Too, a declarative poem written in response to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing, which mentioned before, and he demands a deserved inclusion of disenfranchised and suppressed voices into the chorus that is America. Reading The Weary Blues showed me that Hughes's poems were not merely enjoyable yet puerile attempts at capturing Harlem life in little more than doggerel verse, but are sophisticated experimentations of literature and music from a man born in an era only 3 generations or so after America's anti-literacy laws were repealed. Hughes was writing to communicate not only for himself, but to and for a population that was relatively newly liberated, and to literature that could finally write and speak its own voice, its own thoughts, dreams, and aspirations, and in so doing, directly and indirectly influenced artistic and social change in this country by affecting the words of such important Americans as Lorraine Hansberry and Martin Luther King Jr. who were both inspired by Hughes's poem, Mother to Son, which we'll do now. Well, son, I tell you, life ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards all torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps, 'cause you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Though the title of Hansberry's Pulitzer Prize-winning play, A Raisin in the Sun, was taken from a line in Hughes's poem Harlem, the storyline featuring the unconquerable and kind matriarch Lena Younger is a dramatization of Mother to Son. And in a time when people are being harassed for their identity, when identities are in fact being legally erased by prejudice, and it becomes a state offense to document events that powers wish to keep undocumented, when we are being sold redacted texts as gospel truth, I submit to you that we need poets and writers and historians to tell the truth about who we are, who we were, and who we can be. And I submit that Langston Hughes was such a poet, and The Weary Blues is such a book. Thank you.
So first, to bring a musician with you, take notes for next year. All right, and finally, this evening, I'd like to introduce to you Jackie C. Horne, presenter for Winnie-the-Pooh. She's worked for a decade in children's book publishing before returning to academia to earn an MA in children's literature from Simmons College and a PhD in 18th and 19th century British literature from Brandeis University. As an assistant professor at the Center for the Study of Children's Literature at Simmons, she taught courses on fantasy and science fiction for children and young adults, multicultural literature, and writing pedagogy. So please welcome Jackie C. Horne.
This is my friend who I brought.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. Before I start, I just wanted to ask, how many of you in the audience have read Winnie-the-Pooh when you were kids or had the book read to you when you were a kid? Okay, so almost everyone, yeah. So if this were a popularity contest, I think I could just, walk. But the 100-year book debate isn't about popularity, or at least it's not only about popularity. We're asking you to vote tonight for the best book from 100 years ago. I should put Pooh up here. Stay up there. Okay. The best book from 100 years ago, the book that is still relevant to readers today. So before I offer my arguments in favor of Pooh, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the author of this world-famous book and how he came to write it. Not many people remember this today, but in the 19-teens and 20s, Alan Alexander Milne was one of the most popular and most prolific writers for adults of the day. Not only was he a famed humorist, essayist, and novelist, he was one of the most commercially successful playwrights of the early 20th century. 40 of his plays were performed in London's West End and on Broadway to both appreciative crowds and critical praise. Milne had never thought about writing for children, at least not until 1922, when a fellow author asked him to contribute some verses to a new magazine for children she was editing. He initially refused, but some part of his mind must have been intrigued by the idea, because he began playing around with words and soon had a poem to send to her. And later that year, during a rainy holiday in Wales, to get away from his rowdy friends and family, he wrote a second poem, and then a third. And by the end of 1922, he had over 40 children's poems, enough for a slim book. Now, Milne's London and New York publishers weren't all that keen on children's verse. Milne had just published the commercially successful detective novel, The Red House Mystery, and they were eager for him to write another detective story. As John McCrae of Dutton notes, when Milne told him about what he'd been working on, quote, "Probably the most hopeless kind of manuscript a publisher expects to receive from his favorite author is that of poetry for children." But to please, or perhaps appease, their popular author, Milne's London publisher, Methuen, agreed to move forward with the project. So with little fanfare and low expectations, Milne's first children's book, When We Were Very Young, was printed and released to the public in November of 1924. And to almost everyone's shock, even Milne's, by the end of December, Milne had become 1924's best-selling poet in the world. It was a hugely crazy popular book, just like Hemingway. It's really surprising. Like, what was going on? People just really loved these poems. And of course, given the popularity, Milne's publishers naturally urged him to write a second book of verse for children. But instead, he sent them the manuscript for Winnie-the-Pooh. And Methuen and Dutton soon had another unexpected hit on their hands. While some early reviewers did not like the Pooh stories as much as they had his verse, the majority raved. From the New York Herald Tribune, "As you read, the conviction grows upon you that Mr. Milne has done it again. There are not so very many books that, sitting reading all alone, you find yourself laughing aloud over. This is one of them. Here is nonsense in the best tradition, with a high seriousness about it that children and other wise people love." And then this from literary critic May Lamberton Becker. "When the real Christopher Robin is a little old man, children will find him waiting for them. It is the child's book of the season that seems certain to stay." And stay it has. Although in the 1920s, Milne's children's verse outsold his Pooh stories, in the 90 years since, Pooh has been translated into more than 80 languages, including Latin, and has sold more than 50 million copies worldwide, and I expect we'll sell a few million more in this anniversary year. Over the years, though, Milne's children's books have had their share of detractors. I think we each are calling attention to like the bad things as well as the good things, so that's good of us, isn't it? Such critics argue that the poetry and the stories, with their faux childish misspellings, constant capitalizations, and lack of conflict, are overly sentimental, affected, even twee, or that they are nostalgic for a lost Arcadia and an innocent upper-middle-class British childhood, neither of which ever really truly existed. Dorothy Parker's scorn is perhaps the most famous. Some of you know this. In her constant reader column in The New Yorker in 1928, she mocked that page 5 of The House at Pooh Corner was, quote, the first place at which Twanston Reader flowed up. Yeah, really mean, Dorothy Parker. Happily, my take on Pooh is closer to that of Sarah Burnside's than Dorothy Parker's. Writing in The Guardian in 2016, Burnside argues that Winnie-the-Pooh is more cutting than we thought when we were 6. Critics of A.A. Milne's children's books focus on their syrupy sentimentality, but to see only treacle is to miss the point. So, what is the point? Why does Winnie-the-Pooh still matter? First, I'd point to Milne's deft use of language. There are a lot of sites on the internet listing quotations purportedly from Pooh, quotations replete with painfully treacly prose and baldly didactic sentiment. Most, of course, are from the Disney films or from bowdlerizations of the original stories, not from Milne's books themselves. If you go back to the actual Milne, you'll discover a wry, wise, and witty prose stylist with a lightly humorous touch. Take this from the very opening of Winnie-the-Pooh. Here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way, if only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you, Winnie-the-Pooh. As Griselda Heppel argues, Milne's sentences are characterized by a rhythmic buildup of words that manages to convey meaning, warmth, character, emotion, and a delightfully absurd humor that deflates pomposity in language in the kindest way. Second, the Pooh stories are funny, right? They're funny in so many different ways and so many different registers and to so many different kinds of readers. We're very short on time here, so I won't share you which are my favorite lines and which make me laugh out loud, but I hope after the presentation, after the voting maybe, we can all get together and share our favorite Pooh moments. Third, the way the book celebrates the spirit of free play, play without purpose or goal, which is really uncommon in our day today. As a teacher, Tom Longano, noted, in the 100-acre wood, it is okay to have no plans, to wander about and create adventures or misadventures that don't amount to much of anything. Pooh and others are merely happy to be alive in a world far bigger and grander than themselves, so long as they are walking in the company of good friends. Fourth, I'd call attention to Milne's canny ability to craft what children's literature scholars call cross-writing, books that speak simultaneously to both kids and adults. With its frame story adult narrator, child protagonist, and part child, part adult toys, Pooh is a prime example of cross-writing. But even more interestingly, the book also breaks down the boundaries we commonly oppose between child and adult. Pooh gives us childlike adults and adult-like children, child and adult mixing and merging and shifting in a way we rarely acknowledge in books or in real life. And then finally, I would argue that the most important aspect of the Pooh books is the promise they hold that comfort is ours for the taking. The 100-acre wood offers its inhabitants, and through them its readers, a safe space to explore both their own feelings and the world around them. Even when things go wrong, a bear eats too much honey and gets stuck in a rabbit hole, a donkey misplaces his tail, a flood traps a very small animal in his house. All turns out all right in the end for Pooh and his friends. The key to this sense of safety and comfort is the deep well of kindness, companionship, and affection at the heart of the Pooh stories. Safety, kindness, and love make Winnie-the-Pooh the perfect book to return to over and over again, especially when you're feeling blue or discouraged or having a really bad few weeks like the ones I've just experienced. Weeks filled with sickness and sadness and deaths both unexpected and shocking. The comfort gives you that ability to take respite from all of the horrible things that are going around that my other two panelists talked about, and then to return to the fight the next day. We can't be fighting all the time. We can't be on all the time. And going back to Pooh gives us sort of the re-energizes us to go back to the fight. But does Winnie-the-Pooh really stand up to two of the most influential and acclaimed works of American literature of the early 20th century? Oh, you're laughing, but we were talking backstage. If this was 50 years ago, I wouldn't even be here. I would be like, what the hell are you doing? Children's books? They don't matter. So Just remember that. We're talking about 100 years now instead of 50 years, so yay me. Comparing a book for children to a collection of poetry or novel written for adults is a bit like comparing apples to oranges, or perhaps apples to a pot of honey and a cup of condensed milk. Because people tend to look down upon books for children, especially those of us in academia know this experience. Children's books are not as important, they're not as complex, they're not worthy of attention as real adult books are. But Milne himself never underestimated or looked down upon the genre, assuming it was somehow less than literature for grown-ups, even though only 1% of his overall writing output was for children. He only wrote 4 children's books over the course of his life. And so I would argue that we shouldn't either, because children's books can take us to the very heart of what it means to be human, more directly, more acutely than any work of literature intended only for grown-ups ever can be. Okay, I'd like to end not with my words, but with Milne's. In his introduction to the Christopher Robin storybook, Milne said this about writing poetry. If you can find words which keep time to the music, and which are just the words you want to say, then the verses which you write are verses which sing themselves into people's heads and stay there forever, so that even when they are alone and unhappy, they have this music with them for company. So, if Milne's stories, as well as his verse, have sung themselves as deeply into your head, into your heart, as they have into mine, I invite you to vote tonight for A.A. Milne's Winnie-the-Pooh. Thank you.
I mean, bringing Winnie-the-Pooh and sticking it up here, masterstroke. All right, guys, please give a round of applause for all of our debaters tonight. Dr. Hilary Justice, Regie Gibson, and Jackie C. Horne. Well done. All right, kids, so now is the time where we kind of turn the program over to you. So does anyone have a question for our presenters this evening?
My name is Lisa Fagan-Davis, and I live right here in Boston. I have a question for Hilary. I'm wondering if you could tell us about the cover.
Okay, Hemingway had absolutely no control over who chose the cover.
And scene.
Typical.
Yeah. Scribners had their covers designed to sell modernism in a fresh way. So the interesting thing about that cover, it seems to have nothing whatsoever to do with the novel. It's like completely irritating. You know, I have that on a t-shirt, but to this day, I cannot find a connection between that illustration and you know, the novel itself. The cool thing about Hemingway's books, though, I'm doing what they do in West Wing. This is called, oh, that's a really great question. Now I'm going to answer something else. Scribner's branded Hemingway. So if you take off those beautiful dust jackets, which are just, you know, they're evocative of an aesthetic that is supposed to be, you know, elitist and alienating, and it's successful because I feel alienated by it. But if you take off the dust jackets, all of Hemingway's early books, they're black with gold labels containing the titles. And so you line them up on your bookshelf, they look identical. They were branding him. F. Scott Fitzgerald's, for comparison, they're blind stamped, so you can see the shadows of the title in his name, and they're navy blue. So never the twain shall meet. Navy blue, black for Hemingway, and I have no idea what that means.
Hi, so my name is Flora. I'm from Brookline, and I had a question about Winnie-the-Pooh. I just read it to my 5-year-old, and he asked, why is it that it has a sad ending?
Oh, the Winnie-the-Pooh or the House of Pooh Corner?
House of Pooh Corner.
Yeah, the House of Pooh Corner. Oh. Because Milne didn't want to write any more children's books by that. No, I mean, by that time, the whole Pooh, it had become a huge phenomenon, and his son had become so identified with Christopher Robin. He was called Billy by his family. He wasn't called Christopher Robin. And at first, it was kind of cool that people saw that he was Christopher Robin, but as the years went on, it became a real burden to him. And for Milne, he had written all these other things, and he didn't want to be pigeonholed as a children's book writer, even though he respected children's literature. He didn't want people to forget and we have forgotten. So, I mean, those two reasons, and also the idea of growing up, you leave behind your toys. So he wanted to convey that idea too, that his son was going off to school and was not going to be playing with his toys every day like he had been when he was 4 or 5 or 6. So I think all three of those are the reasons why the book ends the way it does. That seems sad for a kid who is still playing with his toys. But for a grown-up, I don't know if it feels sad, because it feels like I can return to that. I can return to that time and place myself or with the kid I'm reading to. And it's a pleasure rather than a sorrow.
I don't know, I think going to school is sad.
I
agree with the
time for
5-year-old.
One more question.
Hello. Who chose these books and why?
Hi, I'm happy to answer that question as the chair of the committee. So we start with our committee doing some research. We go to the Library of Congress website. There are all sorts of lists on Wikipedia and Goodreads and various other places that tell you the books that were the best sellers in any particular year. And so we start there. We try and put together a short list that has some diverse voices and diverse genres, as you've seen here tonight. And then we put it out to you, if you're on the Associates mailing list, another reason to get on our mailing list, because you help decide who the final 3 candidates are. So we put the list out to our mailing list, and we see how people are feeling about the top 3. And then we winnow it down from there, and then we find our experts. We're so lucky to live in Boston, right, where we have such a rich community of academics and artists to choose from. So that's how we come up with the books.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, we have one last question, and it's from the chat, because we have a bunch of people watching from home, which is so cool. So, my dear, what you got?
Regie, what is your favorite poem from the Wary Blues?
Wow.
And will you perform it for us?
Favorite, wow, it depends on where I enter and how I'm feeling that day, right? But when I think about some of the pieces that I go back to, I love this one for me, Fantasy in Purple. Beat the drums of tragedy for me. Beat the drums of tragedy and death, and let the choir sing a stormy song to drown the rattle of my dying breath. Beat the drums of tragedy for me. And let the white violins whir thin and low, but blow one blaring trumpet note of sun to go with me to the darkness where I go. Right? Yeah, it's a beautiful snapshot of attempting to find hope, even if you're going into a sort of darkened place, and the idea of something so small as a single note coming to you can be a comfort. And as a person who lives in both literature and music, one word and one note has been a comfort often.
Thank you. Again, sure. Can you please give it up for our debaters this evening?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, the time has come. Are you ready for the winner?
Yes.
Drum roll. Yes, my people, and the winner is the Wary Blues, Regie Gibson.
Thank you.
Congratulations, my friend. You have won bragging rights.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here this evening. We so appreciate it. It means the world to us. It means the world to me. I've turned you back over to your leader.
I just wanted to say thank you to Hilary, to Regie, and to Jackie. You all did a remarkable job. Thank you so much. Thank you to Kennedy for your enthusiasm, your effortless skill, and for keeping the event moving and fun. And thank you to everybody who was able to vote. And I just want to really quickly say that, this event, as well as the Pierce event that I mentioned earlier, are brought to you, free of charge and open to the public. And they're made possible by generous donors who believe deeply in the work that we do and the fact that this work matters. So we're inviting everybody to take a moment. If you can find it in your heart to give, if you have anything to give to contribute to this event, we'd really appreciate it, because preserving cultural memory requires more than passion. It requires resources and unwavering commitment, real experience and expertise in the staffing that are securing the collections and special collections for years to come. I warmly encourage you to scan it. Your contribution in any amount directly funds the people who safeguard Boston's literary heritage, and it ensures that future generations inherit a history that is intact, accessible, and alive. So on that note, thank you all so much for coming. Please get home safe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful night. Get home safe.